Hello, hello, this is Kristen, and you're listening to Season 1 of Not Even Wine with Dinner. We have a lot of great stories this season to welcome you in as we talk about drinking, attempting sobriety, mental health, and aging, all wrapped up in a soulful but sarcastic package. For more info about this movement, head on over to www.notevenwinewithdinner.com. Now let's uncork the bottle and get started. Howdy, y'all. This is Kristen, and you're listening to episode number 2 of Not Even Wine with Dinner. Okay, so why the howdy, y'all, you might ask. I am currently in Arlington, Texas, which is where my family home is, and I'm here visiting my dad. He is in his mid-80s, and he is actually doing fantastic, especially for his age. But he's got some really strong Irish and Austrian roots that have tons of longevity in them, which I am hoping to inherit. And so I try to come home, every 3-4 months just to check in on him and make sure I don't see anything weird going on and do some maintenance around the house and all that good stuff that comes with dealing with an aging parent. That is a topic that I will be talking about here in Nude, both here on my website once it launches, and I'm going to be doing a couple little webinars about aging and aging parents and everything that comes along with that nobody prepares us for. But that's not my topic today. Today I want to talk about addiction. While I've been here, I've been experimenting, not really intentionally, but I've been going out to a couple different places with friends and family and whatnot, and been in drinking environments. And because I'm here in the DFW Metroplex, there is more option for a vast array of non-alcoholic beverages. Where I live in Guatemala, not so much. It's been very interesting as I've tried different types of non-alcoholic beers and some seltzers and things along those lines, just to see what has happened to me mentally, physically, trying those things. And I figured the way that I want to start this today is I want to tell you my story, because everyone's story is different. The professionals will say that, addiction comes from a variety of reasons. It can be genetics, it's in your family, environment, trauma, peer pressure, developmental issues, stress, et cetera, and I literally can go through that list and find different points in my life where I experienced all of those to a certain degree. So I want to talk about my story with addiction, and then what I experienced here on this trip while I'm in the middle of a sobriety run. I think I'm 19 months sober right now, and I found it really interesting that going through my sobriety and being at this age, I'll be 57 next week. Happy birthday to me. I didn't expect to have the reaction that I did. People will say things like, oh, she has an addictive personality. We all have a freaking addictive personality or addictive tendencies, because addiction doesn't just have to be drugs and alcohol. It could be your Netflix binging or pornography or video games or shopping, spending, eating. There's anything that you're doing in excess and is affecting you or the people around you negatively is an addiction. That's just the Kristen definition. I'm not saying that's not a Google or an AI or a psychiatric one. That's just me saying, anything that you're doing in excess that is causing problems within yourself, your health, physical or mental, or the relationships around you is an addiction. So it doesn't just have to be drugs and alcohol. So back to my story. I want to share with you what I believe was the cause of me and my drinking. I know when I started. We're going to get to that. And if you would like to read the story in full, I wrote about it on medium.com. The title of the story itself is called The Roller Coaster of a Little Girl's Self-Esteem. And it is under Not Even Wine with Dinner on medium.com if you want to join over there. I'm not going to read the whole story. I have done that on Substack, where I do narrate my stories. I'm just going to kind of tell you my own version without all the fluff. I was born in Connecticut. I grew up in a nice little neighborhood. We were middle class. We lived in a 3-story house that was an apartment. It was a 3-family apartment. Realistically, my life was good. I had a great life. I have a great family. I didn't have any drama growing up to, affect me too much in the early part of my life. When I was 11, my parents came in my room and one day basically sat down and said, "We really want to talk to you." So we had that heavy speech. My dad got a new job and we would be moving to Texas. For the little girl from Connecticut who was just enjoying her life with her friends in her Girl Scouts, I had my big sister there, my grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, huge family. Now we're going to a place I really don't know anything about, and at a time in life where I'm just about to enter middle school. The first thing that I asked was, what about Robin? Because my older sister was 8 years older than me and she didn't live with us anymore. She had moved out. She was living with her female partner. Now I'm going to give you a little side note on that. When I say there was no drama, that's not really true, I suppose. My sister was gay and she came out in 1978 when that was not really a thing. That was very taboo. And it caused a lot of drama in our house. It caused my mother to have a nervous breakdown, which I witnessed. So I feel like I'm like going back to where I was like, I didn't have too much drama in my life. That was very traumatic. And I actually wrote about that too. And I'll link all these stories in the comments. Robin was living with her partner and we all had great relationships. Everything was great. And so my question was, well, what about Robin? And, obviously they said, well, Robin will stay here with Patty. Thinking that I was going to be separated from my sister, who I was best friends with, even as a child with such an age gap, we were so tight that was really probably the biggest blow. Leaving my grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles and friends was bad enough, but losing the relationship and the closeness I had with my sister on a regular basis was really, really upsetting and really shocking. And it was a lot to take in as a sixth grader. Let me just preface this saying I'm not blaming all my not blaming all of my problems on my family's decision to move, but it heavily impacted my life. Moving cross country as a prepubescent teenager was pretty horrid. I shifted from being a cute little kid into this absurdly tall weirdo with wild curly hair, glasses, and giant buck teeth. My baby teeth came out really late, so I had like these two gigantic adult teeth surrounded by baby teeth, and I looked like a rabbit. And at this point, I was probably already 5'6", 5'7". I come from a very, very tall family, so I was taller than everyone, taller from the boys. I also had eye problems because I was born cross-eyed. I had what was called pediatric strabismus. So I kind of had everything going against me and was horribly gawky. Now these Connecticut Yankees are moving deep into the heart of Texas, which was not overly welcoming. When I got into sixth grade in my new state, I was immediately bullied. Day 2. This kid from across the room starts leaning across to me and going, "Duh, hey, doofy, duh." And I'd never had anybody make fun of me before. I never had anybody say anything negative or derogatory to me, even as a child. So that was super weird. Later that day, I came home from school and I got on my bike and I'm just riding up and down the street because I have nothing else to do. This is probably the first couple of weeks we were in Texas. Lo and behold, this kid who was making fun of me is standing in the middle of my street. He calls me over and says, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Oh, I live on the street. We just moved here." And he smirked at me and said, "I live here." And of course, my reaction is like, "Oh my God, you've got to be kidding me." And I got really lucky. The kid backed off, never bothered me again after that. But the bullying continued from other kids. So I was brutally bullied in 7th grade, 9th grade. The 9th grade was the worst. It was my 4th period Spanish class. The girls in the class were what I would call the mean girls. And this is obviously before Mean Girls was even a movie or a concept. But they were mean. They made fun of my eyes, made fun of my accent, my clothes, whatever they could find. They picked on me. And it was horrible. At this same time, I had a really good friend named Debbie. Debbie and I did a lot of sleepovers. We hung out all the time. And I was so depressed at school that I was always looking for an escape. And I was always feeling this peer pressure of trying to fit in. And so when I started hanging out with Debbie, her parents got divorced immediately after we met, I would say within 6 months. And so she ended up living with her father. Her mother left, which I always thought was weird, and she lived with her dad. Well, her dad was like the older dad, so he got up at 5 a.m. to go to work. He went to bed at 9 p.m. to get up for his 5 a.m. the next day. So we were basically unsupervised. In her house, we were able to kind of run around. We would sneak out, and she always had older guy friends and older friends who drove. And at this time, we were between 7th and 8th and 9th grade. She was pretty. She had huge boobs. Here I am. I'm like this gawky looking thing, tall, gangly, buck tooth. My chest is developing a little, but not like her. She was a solid C cup, by 7th grade. Everybody flocked to her, and I was always, like the girl in the back. She always had these older people around, so they were always drinking. And that was the first time that I experimented with drinking, was at Debbie's house. We snuck some Budweiser from a friend. And let me preface and let me back up a minute. When I was young, my parents drank. They had all the 70s cocktail parties, but nothing was crazy. It wasn't out of control. I don't remember any type of fighting or chaos at that stage. And, as a kid, you're like, can I have a sip? Even though you taste it, whether it's beer or wine or liquor, whatever, and you're like, ugh, because it doesn't taste good. And so I did that, and I knew I didn't like the taste of beer. But once I got to Debbie's house, it wasn't about the taste. It wasn't because I wanted to drink. It was because I needed acceptance. I was so desperate for acceptance because I was being picked on. I was being bullied. I felt out of place. I felt out of character. I missed my family. I missed my sister. Everything was bleh. My grades sucked. I just was desperate for positive intention, positive reinforcement. And on a side note, thank God we didn't have the internet or social media, because when you're bullied and you're picked on in school back then, this was in the 80s, there was no 24-hour access to that happening. And I thank God for that. I really do. You could leave school on a Friday. Everybody would go their separate ways, do their own thing, and sometimes almost forget about what happened on Friday. At least the bullies would. And then on Monday, you'd come back in and just pray to God that they just minded their own business. And, sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. Back to drinking at Debbie's house, what would happen is, I would start drinking and I didn't like the taste of it. I simply drank it because it got me accepted. And I was desperate for acceptance. I never really felt peer pressure, so I probably should take that off the list as a child and as a young teen and a youth. When I got older and I tried to start quitting, the peer pressure came in then. That's another story, another day. But what happened then was drinking really brought me acceptance, notoriety, and eventually courage. My sense of humor came out. Kristen, the performer, came out. As I got a little older, I would stand at the front of the group acting out stories, telling animated stories, and making people laugh. When I got older, people suggested I try stand-up comedy, and I never did. So maybe something I should have done, but I didn't. And what really happened was liquid courage became one of my best friends. I could say what I wanted, be who I wanted, act how I wanted. I was accepted, I got attention, and then, as I got a little bit older, it kind of leaned towards the wrong kind of attention. As I entered high school, the rest of my body caught up with the teeth, with my big teeth and my height. Boys finally passed me in height. I had corrective jaw surgery because I had a big underbite. I got contacts. My boobs grew, and I started to blend in with my peers. So I almost became invisible, and I was okay with it. I do remember on the first day of school after having jaw surgery and getting contacts, I think I was 14 going into 11th grade, or maybe 15. And I walked into every class on that first day of school, I think maybe 6 different periods. And people I'd known for years, they didn't recognize me. It was strange, but it was very freeing. At the beginning of class, a teacher would take roll and they'd call my name out for the first time, and I'd raise my hand and say, "Here," and then countless heads would turn around and stare at me and say things like, "Oh my God, I didn't recognize you." I heard that no more or no less than 20 or 30 times that day. Things like, "You look so different. What did you do? You look good." And when someone's like, "What did you do? You look good," you almost have this mixed emotion behind that, because you're like, okay, so basically what you're saying is, "Ooh, girl, you look good now, but man, you look like shit before." Nice job. I'm not boasting. I was not gorgeous. I wasn't a stunner. I wasn't a brick shit house. I was none of those. But the characteristics that were against me that I couldn't control were gone in that moment. In that moment, it made me feel good without the alcohol. But what I realized as I got older was that changing my appearance and my surroundings was easy, because those scars can fade, those scars can move, but changing your mental and emotional state is hard. Those scars stick with you for life. You know, the cut of a scalpel, the snip of the braces brackets, the removal of glasses, a cut of your hair, change of a wardrobe, etc. They put temporary patches on the hurts that you experience. But as the years go by, it doesn't take much to bring your mind's muscle memory back to that first day of school, you know, in 6th grade, or back to your 4th period Spanish class, to remind you of how crappy you felt. You know, it may not be intentional as a group of mean girls taunting you, but maybe one word, one situation, one comment, one tone of voice, and you're emotionally right back where you were at your most vulnerable. And that is where alcohol, for me, soothed so many of my hurts. It just baffled me as I got older as to why I kept drinking. And I think as I got into my 20s and 30s, it just became a habit. It became that habit of acceptance, of peer pressure. And it wasn't that long into my 20s that I started having that thought, I really should quit drinking. I drink too much. I don't feel good. I have hangovers. I'm blacking out. That started right after college, probably in college if I think hard enough about it. But I just kept on, because then the peer pressure starts and you start thinking of, you know, why am I doing this? And then when you think about quitting, you go back to, well, I need to quit drinking. I'm not going to do this anymore. But then your mind goes, okay, well, Valentine's Day is this weekend, so I'll quit next week. Oh, wait. Christy's birthday is next week. I have a party to go to. And you find all these excuses as to why, you know, you can't quit. And so drinking allows like this positive feedback to come in night after night, weekend after weekend, party after party. And it becomes this mental and emotional addiction that heals your hurts and becomes a liquid Band-Aid, you know, on decades of, for me, for adolescent trauma. And that, my friends, is addiction. You know, I think, you know, as I go back and think about college, you know, my self-esteem got a little bit better, but I was getting attention, and it was the wrong attention. You know, I was so geared up to party and doing partying over studying that I just ended up in the wrong crowd, going down the rabbit hole even deeper. And again, this all just comes back to getting the right attention, feeling accepted. You know, even just sitting here saying it to you out loud right now, it breaks my heart when I think about the younger me and how she just felt so garbage about herself. Because when I look back at myself, I think, you know, okay, we all go through gawky situations, but I didn't look that bad. I just felt bad. And I think that's where we get caught up in any kind of addiction. Addiction hits you in your emotions, in your hurts. Wherever you are in your self-esteem journey, I encourage you to consider that drinking, drugs, or any other kind of addictive habit is not the answer, because it doesn't solve the problems. Drinking didn't solve my self-esteem problems. You know, like I said, it gave me the liquid courage. So maybe it gave me a little bit of courage to do things in the moment that I wouldn't have done without it. But there were a vast majority of those things that weren't positive. They weren't good. They've definitely made for some interesting stories, but they weren't necessarily good things. And it doesn't take away the hurt. It just makes things worse in the long term. What I found interesting on this trip, I have quit before, and I quit for 6 years in 2010. And then I started to creep slowly back into a drink here, a drink there. And I never habitually started drinking again. But when I did drink, it became a binge. And so that is why for me, I can't have just one. It just doesn't work. So fast forward to this trip. And what I find so interesting is that I've tried some seltzers and little sparkling watery drinks that claim they're non-alcoholic. Personally, I just think they're overpriced fizzy waters. I paid stupid amounts for a couple of quote unquote non-alcoholic seltzers, which again was just basically flavored sparkling water at a place in Lower Greenville in Dallas. And I was just staggered. And I thought, okay, I could have come in here with a 12-pack of bubbly and probably felt the same way for, a 12. And now I sound like an old person. Like, I remember when I would buy a 6-pack for $2.99. I'm not paying $4 for a beer. But it was the Heineken 0.0 that really got me. That's the closest thing to an alcoholic beverage in my mind that I have tried so far. I've tried a couple other malt beverages. I've tried some non-alcoholic rums, and honestly, I think they all taste like shit. I don't think they taste like alcohol. The rum was basically just a heavy caramely sugar water that I was able to mix to make it taste a little bit more like an alcoholic beverage. But the Heineken 0.0 to me tastes like a light lager. And I was like, the minute I took that first sip, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I had one at a bar and then went to another bar another time to meet some friends and had a couple. And I wasn't feeling that great that day. And it was weird. When I got the second beer, I thought, I really didn't need this. And I started to feel a little bit bloated. And I felt the physical effects of regular beer. Now, what's in it? Maybe it's the hops. I'm not sure. But 2 nights ago, I had dinner with my best friend, and we sat there and we had several drinks. He was drinking a couple of pints, and I had several of the Heinekens. I had 3 Heinekens, again, non-alcoholic, but I found that my mind went back to that addictive state of, I want another drink, I want another drink, I want another drink. And then the next day, I felt like shit. I had I was super plugged up in my sinuses. I had a faint headache. So it was almost like a hangover. So again, it could be the hops. I don't know. But the way I felt mentally was just mind-blowing to me. Because what I realized is it's the addiction to the feeling of acceptance. Now, with this particular person, he's my best friend. We've been friends since 1982. Whatever I drank, he would not care. But if I was in another group, there was something that I felt like would make me look cooler, like a little more hip and cool and part of the crowd by drinking that beer and having that green bottle in my hand that made me feel better. I felt better sitting there with my legs crossed, with my green bottle in my hand, drinking that quote unquote beer, than if I had just had a glass of ice water. And I have really taken time to reflect on that in the last 48 hours because it really depressed me. I had those same weird senses of guilt that I had when I drank. I don't know that I have this huge revelation for all of you with this, but what it's made me do is record this podcast and go back to what is it that caused me to drink in the first place. And so this is what I'm encouraging you to do, whatever the addiction is that you might have in your life. Is it, again, if it's video games, if it's TV, if it's porn, if it's eating, why is it that you're doing it? And take some time to maybe breathe, talk to somebody about it, dig deep into what it is that is making you want to do this thing so much. Because we all have value and we don't need these things to have that value. I don't need that green bottle to be accepted by my friends. I don't need that green bottle to feel good about myself. And that's what I have to go back to, is that without not even wine with dinner, I can be the best version of myself without it. So that's my encouragement to you this week, is to sit back and reflect on what it is that is making you want to drink that drink, do that drug, watch that thing you shouldn't be watching, buy that thing that you really don't need, spend that money, whatever it is, whatever your tendency is. Stand back, take a few breaths, reach out to someone. If it's alcohol or drugs, maybe find an AA or DAA meeting, because you are the best version of yourself without that substance. So that's my encouragement for you this week. Feel free to reach out to me. Be sure to check my webpage that is coming soon. I'm trying really hard to get that done ASAP, but I'm on vacation right now. So I'm hoping to have everything launched by November 1st. All the links are going to be below in the comment. So check them all out, join the waiting list, share all this with your friends and family, and whatever you do, stay safe and stay sober. Y'all have a fantastic day. Just a quick note of the legal jargon. I am not a medical or psychiatric professional, nor am I a recovery or addiction specialist. This podcast is for information use only, and I am simply sharing my own experiences with sobriety, drinking, mental health, and wellness. I'm not here to diagnose or to treat. So if you're struggling and you feel like you are in immediate need, please contact a medical professional or call 911. Thank you guys again. Stay safe, stay sober.